Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm your host, Susan Hobson, and I am flying solo again today. Our dear friend, Rob, has unfortunately been down for the count all week. He finally bit the COVID bullet. So I am going to be stepping in and leading this mission solo, but we've got an incredible guest today. So I know I am definitely going to get her help bringing this heat, especially as it starts to get so cold in our area of the world up here in Canada. To introduce her, this is Keira Torkko, and she is the Chief People Officer at Assent. And what I really love about her story is that she used to be the leader over at the Coaching Association of Canada. And so I love having my fellow coaches on this show. I can hardly wait to dig in with her. But first, Keira, how's it going? Thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm excited to be here today, Susan. And I know we're recording this on National Coaches Week. I don't know when people are going to hear it, but it's a perfect week to talk about the blend of leadership and coaching.
Wonderful. I knew I was going to get deep with you on that concept. But before we do, let's just help our audience get to know you a little bit better. So could you tell our audience who you are and what mission you're currently on in the world?
For sure. My name is Keira Torkko. What's interesting, I'm a mother. I'm a good friend. I am the Chief People Leader at Assent. And, and my mission, is really aligned around, solving puzzles through the lens of people. And, whether that be in my family, in my community, or in my work, I really take a people-focused lens to making sure people feel valued. I don't know how much we'll talk about Assent today, so maybe I'll just do a quick intro just to kind of put that in context.
Sure.
So Assent's a really fast-growing software company. We're about 1,000 people. I lead the people team, which is about 30 people, but I always say I lead a team of 1,000 because it's my job to make sure our team feels motivated and engaged and feel like they have opportunity at the company. We're in the supply chain sustainability space, which is pretty relevant and pretty cool. I've been telling people recently that when I first joined, and I'd be at Christmas dinner with family members, no one knew anything about supply chain. But now the world has done their marketing for us around the Suez Canal, and no one able to buy tomatoes for less than $10. So It's a pretty exciting place to be as well.
Amazing. And so I know that you're excited about National Coaches Week because, as I mentioned in our intro, you actually, that's where you got a start in leadership. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your time there at the Coaching Association of Canada?
For sure. Yeah, no, for me, it was a really interesting career transition, and I think all the points in my career have really been on a different path than, it's never been linear. People are now starting to talk more about a career lattice and that you're bringing skills from one area, and applying them to another. And I think that was what was unique for me coming into coaching as well as into my current role. And so I had actually been leading teams before the Coaching Association, but in a sort of technical services place.
Right.
But when I interviewed, I really felt that this was the point in my career where I could bring an awful lot to this particular space. I'd been an athlete, I'd been a coach, I had business skills. And so it was really exciting. And one of the things I think that I don't know is well known in Canada is that so many of the big national or multi-sport organizations are led by women. So the Olympic Committee, the Coaching Association, On the Podium, the Paralympic Committee, Canada Games are all female-led. And I actually think that's had a really interesting impact on the sports system in Canada.
Why do you think that is? I know we look at this a lot on our show, right? In terms of the gap, the gender gap in leadership. To this day, it's predominantly men that reach that C-suite level. So why in this one industry are we seeing the inverse? And how do you feel like that contributes to the success of what we're doing on the coaching side? Because I know I talk to my female leaders all the time about what we bring to the table that people need in spades, especially in areas of growth.
And I think, it's a great question. And I've thought about it a lot. And all the women who lead these organizations are all incredibly collaborative. And to be successful in that kind of a system.
Yeah.
Companies can operate. Well, no one ever operates in isolation. The partnerships that exist within the sports system in Canada are so multi-tentacled. And I just think women are really good at being able to manage those in a human way. And sport is about relationships and sport is about people. And women are really good at managing relationships and thinking about team. And so I think they've naturally gravitated to leadership roles at this multi-sport national level in Canada.
Yeah, it's great because that obviously aligns with the mission that we're on here at the Leadership Launchpad Project, right? It's all about that heart-centric, people-centric leadership, which really starts with empathy, right?
For
Seeing
sure.
and hearing our people so we can understand our people and understand what our people need to go and grow after their goals, right? So I kind of feel like, yeah, this is something that I'm extremely passionate about. And I want to get your 2 cents on this because one of the most significant shifts that I've seen over the disruption of the last 2 years is that we are really starting to move more than ever in the direction of that new school progressive style of leadership, where it's all about relationships. It's all about that energy and resource exchange, that co-creative style of leadership, right? And so I'm just curious what you have been seeing over there on your side of the fence. I'm definitely imagining that this is something you're trying to lead the charge on at Assent, but I would love to hear your 2 cents in terms of what you've seen over the last 2 years of this disruption.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I think is evolving and changing even now as we believe we're coming out of COVID. And, but yes, fingers crossed. Sorry, Rob.
Everybody but Rob.
Yes. But I do think, some of the things we saw really, really early on, particularly in the tech sector, is that the technology was a really easy switch for us. It was really easy to just say, okay, now we're all working from home. We had the tools, our teams had internet access. That was almost the easiest part of the transition for us. I know that's not the same everywhere, but for us, but it required a different kind of leader going into the pandemic, one who, I often say, that culture is the accumulation of meaningful moments. And it's really hard to have meaningful moments when you're talking to people on a screen like this. So you have to be innovative and you have to be creative and you have to be thinking about the human because everyone was responding to the pandemic so differently. So we would start doing things and we're like, well, surely everybody must want to join, a late in the day Friday Zoom drinks. Well, Friday, people's brains were completely fried. And the last thing they wanted to do was be social in, on Zoom. And so you had to become more personalized with how you were leading people and in a way that you just weren't comfortable doing. How do you be personalized on a Zoom screen? So we would do silly things like, reverse Halloween, where I had the executives deliver candy to people's homes as a surprise rather than trick or treating, because it really was about how do you make people feel valued when you're seeing them in, 2 dimension.
I love that. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, one of the other things that, is really interesting now, and so many people are talking about, getting people back in the space. And, people are trying like, well, we'll have free lunches and we'll do all of this. That's not what's meaningful to people, and so people will come in if they feel valued and value being in that space. And so you have to create that environment where they want to come in and don't feel forced to be in.
Yeah. And this is where that human-centric leadership style really comes into play, right? Because when we were talking about empathy a second ago, which is kind of that entry point into seeing and hearing and understanding your people. But it's also the entry point into like EQ and knowing exactly what it is based on what you're calibrating in that person's human experience that they actually need, right? So that you can actually adapt whatever it is that you're doing in the context of that conversation make that person feel not only safe, but cared for, right? And that is an aspect of how you make sure that your people feel valued, which is one of the biggest, most important pieces to keeping them engaged, whether that's going into the office or remotely.
Yeah.
Why, Keira, then, is it such a hard mindset shift? I saw this article in the HBR a couple of months ago. I was telling you about it a second ago, the leader as the coach, which was talking about how, we really need to embrace this shift towards this style of heart-centric leadership more than ever because of everything that's gone down over the last 2 years. But my question continues to be on this show, why is that such a hard shift for our leaders to make? Even when we hit them with all the data, we hit them with all the scientific research, why do you feel that some leaders just aren't embracing this right now, given the context of the world?
Well, I think that's probably the bazillion dollar question, and one that we, probably could spend a long time thinking about. But, if I peel it back, right to the basics, it's that I don't know that we have the stories, like I spent a lot of time in my career thinking I'm working with data oriented people. I'm going to share all the data with them about, why we should train on EI, and why we should be doing this. And here's the turnover data. But, there's lots of research that will show, presenting people with data doesn't actually always do a whole lot when it is an emotional decision that they've got to make. Sometimes if you present data that shows the alternative, it actually makes the person's existing beliefs even stronger on the other side. And so I am less about data now and a lot more about the story, and sharing the story about where the impact was and what this meant to people. And then I'll throw some data in at a later point in time, just to validate the story. So I've become a lot more of a storytelling leader as a result of this. And, using success stories, like I go to town celebrating small successes, under the meme of, small successes drive your culture. And so I find with my colleagues where I'm at now, we are an innovative company. And something we talk about often is that if we did things the same way as other companies, we wouldn't be growing at 40 to 50%.
Right.
So we have to be curious and we have to be willing to try new things. So I talk a lot about, like in my world, the people world, I encourage my team all the time to use the business language that our partners are using, because, it just gives them that feeling that we understand their world. So I'll say, let's A/B test something, or let's pilot something, so we're going to try, this kind of leadership. We're going to try this kind of leadership. And then let's see what the results are. So I find sometimes putting it back into language and terms and methods that they're used to makes it just a different conversation.
Love it. Let's tell them a story, shall we, about the impact that this style of 2.0 leadership can actually have on their people's growth.
Yes.
Do you have any? I'm just curious, because I know we're working with people on this every single day, but you're right. Like my area of specialty is in neurolinguistic programs. And so it's all about storytelling. It's all about the meaning and the emotion associated to that meaning that's embedded in that story that really is going to take people on that journey and help them shift the most. But I kind of feel like, so that we can exemplify how every leader really needs to be a coach right now. This is requisite. This is what I'm trying to say on this show, is this has now become a requisite leadership skill. Do you have any stories that come to mind in terms of how leading with coaching can really impact your people?
Well, and maybe I'll tell my story, because I don't want to tell someone else's, but maybe I'll share mine in that, as I said, my career hasn't been linear, but I think the coaching people, has been at the root of it. And I've been able to transcend different sectors, different roles, and different departments without being an expert in any one of those areas. So for example, we talked about my role at the Coaching Association. When I became the chief operating officer there, I didn't even know what the NCCP, which is the National Coaching Certification Program, I didn't even know what that stood for. But, I had leaders around me who were like, we didn't hire you to be the technical expert. We hired you because you're going to motivate, engage, and involve your team, and it was the same thing. Like I took on a job when I first joined Assent as the VP of HR. And, I remember saying to my boss, Andrew, at the time, I've led people for many years, but I don't know all the details. And he said, well, we'll surround you with those people. I actually want the leadership and the motivation and how you're going to drive that team. And so my story is one of just putting people first, and that I could transcend from a crown corporation to a not-for-profit to private sector in 3 completely different roles, and still have those companies grow and succeed at those times.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful example of, well, a whole bunch of different things, but the growth mindset that happens in that type of co-creative exchange or relationship, right? It's like, yeah, you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be the expert at that. As long as you're surrounded by teammates that can support you going and growing towards developing some of those things that you actually need. I think that's it. And that's why they wrote this article on how every leader needs to now consider themselves a coach, right? Because this is the time in our history, at least in our lifetime, where we needed to be most adaptable. Our resiliency needed to be on point. That AQ, that adversity quotient, is now the biggest predictor of how much potential that you're going to be able to realize, right? So I think that is something that I love to talk about as well. What about some tips? So I know there's a lot of leaders that are out there listening to this, and I think that they realize that this shift is happening. They might be a little daunted because they just don't even know where to begin. So what tips would you have for leaders out there who are ready to embrace this 2.0 style of leadership but don't know where to begin?
One thing I think is really powerful is asking great questions. And coaches do this really well, inherently in sport, because, you want people to be coming to the answer themselves rather than you having to tell them this. And I speaking of storytelling, I can think of a time when I was relearning to play tennis as an adult. And I had this coach and I didn't know much. I could just hit the ball really hard, but I never paid attention to it coming to my racket. So it was always flying all over the place. And rather than telling me, to look at rather than telling me to watch the ball, he asked me this question, Keira, what direction is the ball spinning when it hits your racket? So of course, I'm an adult. I want to show that I'm really smart and I want to be able to answer his question. So what did I do? I watched the ball, coming to my racket and was able to say to him, oh, it was topspin. And he's like, great. So did you watch the ball to your racket? And I'm like, oh yeah. I did, and so I think, really being focused on asking great intuitive questions, like we've all worked with the person who asks us the same questions over and over again. And what it says to me is that they're not that interested in me. And asking great questions means you have to be a great listener, because you have to have heard, well, I just heard Susan talking about this article she read in HBR. And so now I want to find out more. I want to be curious about, what did you take from that article, Susan? So I think asking great questions is important. I just recently took some training, and 2 questions that they raised that I thought was really valuable ones to ask were, what's on your mind? And so rather than asking the question, like, how are you doing? What's on your mind? And then they encouraged us to ask the question when someone answers, and what else? And I remember asking it the first few times and it not sounding genuine. And, I think any leader wants to sound genuine and authentic, and saying, and what else, was a hard thing for me to say. But the more I asked it, the more I realized I was just getting such amazing insight from that question, because it just even drove things down to the next layer. So I think asking great questions would be one great tip. I think rewarding behaviors in addition to rewarding outcomes is really important. And because Susan, you and I are both storytelling fans, I'm going to tell another story about this.
Please.
I'm sure we all get so many spam from, these business development people who are new in their careers trying to sell us a lot of different stuff. And I know that's a really, really hard job. And I know they're rewarded on, how many ops did they generate or how many demos did they book? And so I got an outreach about 3 weeks ago from this company, Simpler. I'm even going to give them a shout out here, because this guy, Lauren, sent me this outreach, which was so personalized. It was so personalized. And I was like, he's done his research. I haven't said yes to a BD outreach to a meeting in about 9 months. And I don't even need the product that he's selling, but I'm going to reward his behavior and I'm going to have that meeting. I had it yesterday and I've already passed him on to somebody in the company, him and his colleague, because now I think, man, we need this. But I really thought about, I'm going to reward that behavior. And I'm going to reward small behaviors. So I'm going to make sure that people know, and that I'm also a cheerleader. So those would be two. And I also think thinking beyond coaching the individual, like when you're having a team meeting, you also have an opportunity to be a coach with your team. Absolutely. Susan, you're a hockey player, you had a team coach, which was just as important as your individual coach. So when I meet with my team, I'm thinking about good questions for the overall team, in the same way as I might do for individuals.
What constitutes a great question, in your opinion? Because I kind of feel like you and I definitely probably could link up on what you mean by that, but we're talking to a bunch of leaders who are realizing that they actually have to ask questions rather than command and control. So I kind of feel like that naturally is where I want to take them, right? Because you're right. This is what makes that exchange so creative and collaborative and powerful in terms of growth, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I think it's important, it's not forced, like I've met people who Susan's talking and I'm already thinking about the question I'm going to ask her. And so I'm not actually paying attention to anything else she's saying. So, it has to come somewhat naturally, as a result of the conversation. But I do know something I will coach people on is when you're starting to try to come up with different questions, maybe you write some down ahead of time, that you can tailor and adapt. So I love the phrase, help me understand, so, even writing that down in front of somebody so that Susan just talked about, X, like help me understand the why or the what or how, about what you've just spoken about. Like that's a really good one. A question that demonstrates genuine curiosity and not that's just one to ask a question, right?
Right.
I think is really powerful. And one that shows that you've done a bit of research. A lot of people will ask leaders, what they want their legacy to be. And I love it when I hear people answering, like, I want people when they met me to feel like they were the most important person in the room and they're the most important person at that time. And what better way to make them feel important than having done your research? Like spend 2 minutes before you meet somebody to remember what you know about them and tie it into what you're asking. You worked on a project last year where you interviewed my friend Tracy Allen, and Susan, that was really interesting. What did you take from that conversation with Tracy?
Right. I love these. This is great framework for all of our leaders out there, because that's really what it comes down to is the quality of question leads to the quality of results that or answer that you're going to get that's going to inform the quality of your result. Yeah. And I do think that is at the epicenter of 2.0 leadership is your questions are curious. Like you are trying to fundamentally understand like what makes your person tick in this area, right? Or what their aspirations are in this area. Yes. And looking back into the research of the mission that they've been on, it helps give context, right? Yeah. That's going to inform a lot of those really killer, curious questions. But I think it really comes down to that for all our leaders listening out there is that it's not just about the task at hand. It's about spending that moment, that touch point, trying to understand the person, right? That is approaching that task, to understand what's working and not working and why for that person. Because again, in the Leadership 2.0 sense, your number one responsibility is to be able to show up in service to what's working, not working, and why, right? So that you can, again, help them to overcome whatever resistance they're experiencing, or help them to celebrate, right? All the victories that they're making along the way in terms of the progress. Because that, again, is what we really want to anchor into most with our people. The process is what they can control. It's great to know about the outcome, because again, it's knowing about what drives your person, what's important and meaningful to them in this pursuit. But I think it's like, obviously where we really want to dig is an understanding where they're at in that process of making that progress. And then naturally seeing what role we're going to play in that as their leader.
Certainly. Yeah.
I love it. And you just kind of let the cat out of the bag. We love the legacy question here.
Oh, did you?
Launchpad project, but it's okay, because I kind of feel like you gave us maybe like the high level answer version of that. And I'm just so curious over here. I have to go circle back around.
Yes.
With all of this fabulous bringing coaching into leadership work that you're doing out in the world, what do you want the legacy of that to be someday?
It's a great question. I want to make sure I don't leave this conversation without saying something else about the NCCP, because I think there's so much we can learn. So if I can come back to that, Tracy, that would be fantastic. 100%. But I do think, like I alluded to it a little bit, the legacy question is a really tough one, and one I think about a lot. I think about it in the context of my boys and my family and the volunteer work that I do, and I want people to, when they're at my service, I want them to think that, that I cared about their development and their opportunities, and that they wanted to win with me. And I wanted to win with them, that they left with that feeling that we were going to be successful together, and that it wasn't for me, but that they would be willing to take a leap of faith with me. And that's how I made them feel. And then I made them feel that they had opportunity, that they could achieve, that they may not have thought about themselves.
Oh, I love it.
So I think that would be important to me.
Untapping all that hidden, unseen potential, right? And being a catalyst to that. I love that legacy. Let's circle back around, because I know you definitely were mentioning off mic that there were some really significant things that you took from that experience, right? And developing the NCCP coaching certification.
Well, and I just think it's important to learn from this, because I think I think a lot about it in the context of people leadership. And so some of the things, like the National Coaching Certification Program in Canada, at least when I led it, was Canada's largest adult education program. I don't know if people know that, like how many coaches are being trained. And I think what's really exciting is that we do this before people even become coaches. They're involved in this training. And we don't do that with leaders all the time. We put them in a role,
yes, speak on it.
And then we expect them, to start to learn on the job. But in the NCCP program, whether you're in bocce or hockey or basketball or, martial arts, there is a pathway in the country that's been designed by adult educators who really are about training you to be thinking about performance, whether it be Timbit soccer or whether it be Olympic level luge, it's thinking about people. And the cornerstone of the entire program is about making ethical decisions. Imagine if every manager in Canada, before they actually took on their role to be a manager, had to learn about making ethical decisions. Within the NCCP, it's planning a practice. Like, imagine if every manager in Canada knew how to have a great meeting. Like, we've all been at terrible meetings. We probably have all been at terrible meetings in the last week or two, but we train this. And then there's an expectation of lifelong learning, of self-reflection, and then of specialization, based on, the sport that you're in. And this program is heralded worldwide for how it drives people thinking about performance. And so I think there's a lot you can take from it, that it's a requirement, and I struggle sometimes with, do you make training optional or do you make it required for people? And those people who are really excited about it and motivated and are curious and want to be lifelong learners, you don't have to make something mandatory.
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to do it. And so by not making it mandatory, you're almost going to see who is it that wants to rise to that occasion and who puts emphasis and priority on this. And so, so when I think about it, sport is such a rich platform to help people develop these skills. And so even if you aren't in a leadership role officially in your company, you can be in a leadership role in so many different ways. And you can also develop those skills through sport. And you're going to get some great training along the way that's going to translate into your role at work.
I think as a former professional athlete, I definitely found it so fascinating, right? Like coming up the ranks, how long it took us to get to these types of resources. Took me till I was in the Ivy Leagues to have that type of resourcing.
Yeah.
But we talk about this in terms of, I think every coach, athletic coach, needs a coach too. I think they're leaders. And for that same reason, I think leaders need coaches. I think they do as well. But in what we've been looking at on this show as a trend is that leaders don't typically get leadership development and training until the age of 46 when they become a leader or rise to the role known as leader. So we're looking to disrupt that. But in your humble opinion, where do you think that journey should begin? Where should we actually start to engage in our own leadership development and training in and around the leadership behaviors we've been talking about today?
Oh my goodness, as early as possible. We talked a little bit earlier, you've got a young daughter and I have two young boys. And even now, we talk at home about being kind, and caring about other people and, demonstrating great interest in other people. And to me, those are just innate leadership traits that are going to serve people well, moving forward. So I think it starts really, really early. And I think it comes back to an earlier question you asked about broadening what the definition of leadership is. It's not about teaching somebody how to use a Google spreadsheet. While important, and someone has to do that for their job, it's not just about that. So as we broaden that definition, I think it happens, earlier and earlier. My son this summer had his first summer job. And I think it was 40 hours a week. And, I think a lot of kids transition into maybe 10 hours a week or 15, but we went big, and he was a camp counselor, which I think is an amazing first job because, you are now leading these kids. And at the end of every week, he had an evaluation, and the evaluation was things like, are you remembering the kids' names? Do the kids feel comfortable, coming and talking with you? It had nothing to do with did you know an awful lot about basketball to run this basketball camp? And he would come home every Friday, and I think he would just bow his head because I'd come in the door. I'd be like, Jeremy, sorry, now I've used his name. Tell me what your report card was this week. And it was just like, oh, brother. But it was the most exciting thing that those were the things that they were placing importance on to him.
I think it's great. This is one of the things I love most about the training ground for high performance known as sports, right? There's so much leadership development and training just buried in the context of sports. That's why I think every young person should definitely have that type of experience, right? In a locker room with teammates. I mean, essentially everything we're talking about today in this 2.0 way of leadership. Teamwork makes the dream work, right? And it's like having the opportunity to learn from mentors like your son is in the context of what he's doing, or whether it's just on a team, in a team environment where you have coaches, but maybe older teammates who are also doing some of that for you.
Yes.
I absolutely love it. So where can our people find you if they're curious to learn more about the mission that you're on or any of the things that you talked about today? Where can everybody out here listening find you?
Well, I am at Assent, and I love the company, so they can certainly check me out at assent.com or on my LinkedIn profile. I do try to post content from time to time on leadership and coaching that I'd love to be in dialogue with people about. So search me out there.
Wonderful. And is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with today?
It is National Coaches Week, so thank a coach. Don't just be a coach, but thank those who are playing that role, and make sure you share with them how important and meaningful that is.
Wonderful. I'm going to start by coaching you or thanking you, Keira, for being here today and riffing with me on coaching. I just think this has so much packed in at this interview in terms of how we can really empower our leaders to make this shift. I really appreciate you being here. For everybody else out there listening, thank you so much for tuning in. Please like and subscribe over on any of your favorite podcast platforms, the Leadership Launchpad Project. Leave a review or a question if you have one. We were just talking about how important asking killer questions is. And then for anything else, leadership development training, psych safety, breaking burnout, any of this dream team optimization work that we're doing right now that we're really excited about, please come over to the website, elitehighperformance.com. You can find everything there, or you can reach out to Rob and I, and we'd be happy to make time to connect with you and answer any of your questions live. That's it for this week. Thank you, Keira. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.